A couple weeks ago, I built Helms Deep in Minecraft, and if you want to see how that turned out, I'll leave a link down below. But it got me thinking, what would be the easiest thing in Middle-earth to build? And let me tell you, it definitely isn't Isengard, because this build ended up taking 3 times the amount of time that Helms Deep took. It took 3 times the amount of effort, but the results were 3 times as good. But before we jump in, only 11% of people who actually watch my videos are subscribed. So if you do enjoy this video, please consider subscribing. It really helps a small channel like mine. So we started this build just how you should start any Isengard build, and that's by building a circle, which I absolutely smashed out of the park first time. So after watching a few YouTube videos and actually figuring out how to build a circle, because I quickly came to a realization that I don't actually know how to build a circle in Minecraft. Eventually I found a video that really helped, I'll link it down below, and then we made a second attempt at making the circle. So right here is just me finishing up making the first official circle that I didn't completely botch. And I know exactly what you're thinking, because I was thinking the exact same thing. That is no way big enough, especially for an Isengard build. But don't worry, later on the build I do make this way bigger. But what you'll see now is me just building the outer wall. So from here, it gives me a good idea of how the outer wall will look. You can see how seriously I'm taking it as well, because I've marked how circular it is and things like that. But believe it or not, I actually had a really fun time building this circle, because I've never actually had to build one of this scale in Minecraft before. If any of you haven't done it, I would fully recommend it. It's quite a fun challenge, and it actually ended up taking me about 2.5 hours in total, because I ended up building so many of them. I enjoyed it so much. And then this is how the first complete circle looked. Don't worry, like I said, I do make it way bigger. But at the time, I thought this was going to be big enough for Isengard, but as you can see from the image, it is nowhere near the actual size in comparison to what it should be. But from here, I got what you would call circle obsession, where I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build another tiny, bigger circle around it and then knock down the inner circle, which will help absolutely nothing, because I had to do another circle later on due to the scale of the build. But right here, you'll see me finishing up the outer circle, knocking down the inner circle, and then this is how that ended up looking once that was all done. And once my love for building circles had ended, for now at least, I ended up digging up what would be the 8 pathways and filling them in with gravel. And that's because I want to make it as accurate to the films as I possibly can make it. And by doing this, it'll just add a little bit more to the build. And once complete, this is how it looked with the 4 diagonal pathways complete. I hadn't yet done the cross-shaped ones, but I get onto those later in the build. And then once I'm done with that, I end up building up the walls. So that's the outer wall and the inner wall, because I'm totally not going to have to knock those down later and waste a ton of time doing so. But anyway, I continued building up these walls, not knowing the tragedy that was about to come in terms of knocking it all down. But it took me about an hour and a half to do this, but luckily for you, I'm just going to put it all in this speed montage, and then this is what it looked like once the outer wall and inner wall were fully built up. But moving on from that absolute tragedy and colossal waste of time, I end up putting the paths in, the cross-shaped paths. I do these 3 wide just to match the diagonal paths so they're all corresponding with each other, and then this is how that looked when that was all complete. Although later on in the build, I do expand this because I do make the walls way bigger in comparison to the real build itself. I even went as far as to put in some makeshift gates, and at the very least, it gave me a good idea of how I wanted it to look. Although I did end up wasting a little bit of time, it didn't really matter because it gave me an overall feel for how the Isengard walls and gates would look. But once I complete that, it all looked good, so this is how it ended up looking. At this point of the build, I was pretty much all in on this circle, so what I end up doing now is I end up digging up the entire floor so I can put a new floor in. And like I said, I'm not going for the tree look, I'm going for the wasted land look. So I dig up all this floor and then I ended up putting in a new one. But I was all hands on deck. I'd literally invested everything into this floor, only to like redo it later. But it was completely fine because I realised what I liked and what I didn't like. And there were a lot of aspects about the first floor that I didn't like. But this is how it ended up looking once it was all finished. From here then, what I end up doing is I just end up lighting up the pathway just to give it some light in the dark time. And then from there, I ended up putting in some fire pits like there are in the film. This is one aspect that I was really happy with and that I did continue when I did do the new floor later on in the build. But there were a lot of aspects I did like about this floor. I just wanted it to be a bit more grey in the final build because it was a bit too colourful for me. But once all the fire pits were put in, this is how it ended up looking. But moving on with the build, this is when I started to tackle the actual tower itself. itself. Now, what's so unique about Isengard is everyone has a sort of different perspective on how it looks. To me, it's a sort of circular design, so that's how I did it. And I very much used Henry Ford's motto, who famously created Ford, and that is you can use any colour as long as it's black. So what I end up doing is I end up patterning it with a load of different black colours, but at the end of the day, when you zoom out, it looks really detailed and really nice. And in case you were wondering the exact bricks I used 2 rows of polished blackstone bricks, then a row of obsidian, 2 rows of chiseled polished blackstone and another layer of obsidian, 2 black concrete powders, another layer of obsidian, 2 layers of black concrete, again a layer of obsidian, and then finally I finished it off with 2 layers of black stone, and then I would repeat. So I did that about 5 times before building it inwards. But that was the joy about building Isengard for me, is that I could put as much flair into it as I wanted, and I could use multiple black bricks, and you'll see at the end now, as I'm zooming out, the amount of detail that it has, and the amount of character that the building itself has. I think it turned out really well, but don't worry, later on I do go back into it, and I do amend a lot of it, so just to add a little bit more detail here and then to make it more accurate to the films themselves. But just like I said about being all in on my first circle, I end up building the top and the barricades to it. I don't know what I was thinking, because when I showed a friend this circle, he was like, dude, what is that? And that's when I realised it was way too small, but I amend that later on. And then once that was complete, this is how it looked, so it was just a rough idea of how the circle would look once finished. And then once complete, I moved on to the spikes on top of Isengard. Now this is how they looked, and this is how I wanted them to look, as they do in the films. So I played around with a few designs. Let me know which one you like the most in the comments, but these were 3 initial designs I came up with. But you will have to wait till the end of the video to see which one I ended up going with, if I went with any of them at all, or if I went with a sort of version of that. But right here, what I end up doing is I just end up building a balcony. Of course, Sauron ends up coming out of here to rally the Uruk-hai to march on to Helms Deep. So I had to put that in as that was such an integral part to the build. So this is how that ended up looking. At this part of the build, I go back to making the circle way bigger. I believe I made it around 3 or 4 times the size of the original circle, which looks good because it doesn't make the tower look so silly being inside such a small circle. I feel like if we kept the circle the same size as it was originally, Saruman would only be able to rally about 60 Uruk-hai if that to march to Helms Deep, which means the battle would have been over very fast. But nevertheless, eventually we got the circle done, and it looked really good in the size comparison compared to the images. So this is how that ended up looking, and after that what we end up doing is building the outer wall much later on during the build. But right here I might need a moment of silence, because this is where it took me like 13 or 14 minutes just to knock down that entire wall that I built up earlier in the video. So I knock all this down, and this is just me knocking down the last few blocks. From here, I end up knocking out some of the ground floor, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the pathways even bigger. But again, this turned into a bit of a waste of time, because a light bulb moment hit when I was on Discord to a friend, and he said, why don't you just build it up one, so it would prevent me knocking out all the entire ground. So that's what I ended up doing. But nevertheless, this is what it looked like when all the gravel was in, just so you get an idea of how big the circle is. And right here you can see where I've like knocked out some of the ground floor before I realised, why don't I just build it one up? So I quickly abandoned this and then started building up the first wall on the outside. But just as I am building up those walls, now is the perfect time to mention that me and my friend James have recently started a Discord, and that's because we have some video ideas like build battles where we have 10 minutes to make builds and you guys get to vote on it. So we'll be doing polls and letting you decide what we build within those allotted 10 minutes. So if you do want to join that server, that'd be great. I'll leave a link down below. And honestly, I had to stop doing like the groundworks at this point because I was so frustrated I didn't realise I could just build one up in the end. But this is how it looked once that first wall was fully built. And once that was complete, I eventually got back to the groundwork. So to start things out, I had to take out all those fires that I put in because I didn't want to sound a fire where there wasn't one. Believe me or not, I didn't know it at the time either. This would take the longest part of the build. I'm not even joking, just to fill out all the groundworks. And at this point, I was really starting to think, why didn't I just put trees in there? But I really wanted to have that feel like it does in The Two Towers, because I love that film. It's my favourite in the franchise. Let me know what yours is down below anyway. So moving on from taking out those fires, I ended up getting that gravel path in again, but this time obviously it was built up by one block. And this time when building the floor, I didn't want it to look so colourful, because in the build it does look very grey and gloomy. So that's the look I went for, as you'll see as I go along with this groundworks. Also, before I forget to say, when I did start this build, I did actually look at the Middle-earth map and I sort of adjusted Isengard to where it should be. So this is the original map, and then in a second now, I'll show you how far away Isengard should actually be from Helms Deep. So if you can see, Isengard is in the top left, whereas Helms Deep is a bit bottom right from it. So they're not too far apart from each other, and that's how I've made it in this world anyway, in case I want to continue with any Middle-earth builds. But back to the Isengard build itself, each one of these groundworks, each section took me about half an hour of real time to do, but as you'll see, it has a much greyer look to it. So this is how the first one looked, and just to save you time, this is how the second one looked, and then again, this is how the third one looked. And before I show you the fourth one, if any of you want to see how I actually put all these blocks in, because they did take me about half an hour each go, so if you want me to show you the sped up footage, anything like that, let me know in the comments down below, and I'm happy to post a full video to this, because obviously there's using no world edits, so I want to show you that it is possible and that it just takes a hell of a lot of time to do. But this is how the fourth one ended up looking, and at this point we were halfway through the floor. It was safe to say at this point, because half of it was done, I took a little break. I came back the next day nice and refreshed, and then I got the rest of the flooring complete. So then this is the rest of them going in and how they look step by step. But again, if you want to see the full length video or a sped up version, let me know in the comments down below. But anyway, that's how it looked once all the flooring was put in. And then there was only the sort of minor details left to do, like build the outer wall, put in the fire pit, and make any amendments to the actual build of Isengard itself, as well as the groundworks. So you'll see all that just now. Back to my favourite part of the build though, building my final circle of this build. Honestly, I don't know what it was about these circles, but the symmetry, I just loved the whole point of it. And this is just me doing the final circle, which is the largest, because it's the outer wall. And then as soon as this is done, what we end up doing is filling the flooring in at the top. And once all of this was complete, so doing the outer circle and all the flooring, this is how it looked. I also built a little barricade around it, just to give it more of a nice aesthetic, realistic to the build. And once this was done, I ended up putting in the gates. I used the same design as I used on the original wall, so it didn't feel like I completely wasted my time. And then once that was done, this is how it looked with it all in, and they were all completely in symmetry with each other. And once the gates were complete, one of the aspects that I really liked from that first circle was the fire pits that I built in, because in the actual films there are loads of fire pits all around Isengard, so I work on putting those back in because I really wanted to keep them. So I ended up building about 8 or 9 fire pits in total. I can't remember the exact number, but to do this I just used nether rail, and that worked an absolute treat because the fire's eternal that way. And once that was all complete, these are how all the fire pits looked. But one quick thing I want to say before I show you how they all looked is I do end up adding 1 or 2 more off camera, just because when looking at the images I wanted it to be more realistic. So I add a few more final touches to the build itself, because I don't want it all to be level. I want there to be rocks. I want it to be really sort of bumpy. And in a minute I'll show you what the final reveal looks like, and I hope you enjoy, because these are the final touches that I'll just run through with you now. So for the final touches, all I did was I added a few rocks around just so it didn't look so flat, as well as adding some wood, which immediately burnt down. But in the original build there is some wood where there used to be cranes and things like that. Other than that, I just added a base layer to the Isengard itself, and then this is how it turned out in the end. So this is the final build. Just as we walk slowly towards the entrance itself, I used stone and cobblestone to build up the walls in the end, just to make it look a bit more jazzy. Then as we walk through, this is Isengard itself. I did set the time as well, so it looked like a nice setting, and you can see what I mean as well about the wood burning. So overall I was really happy with this build. It took over 12 hours to build, and it took another 10 hours to edit. So if you have enjoyed this video, it would really mean a lot if you would consider subscribing, liking, and maybe even joining the Discord so you can get involved with future builds. But this is just a panoramic view now of Isengard, sort of giving you a 360, and you can see all those rocks that I put in along with the fire pits. And I really liked the background of the wood burning. I think it really added to the build. And then just as we get a bird's eye view of the build, let me know what you think of it all in the comments down below. I believe we also included around 17 or 18 fires, just because I really wanted to give it that rundown look. Although I ended up probably regretting it, because it would have saved me a lot of time putting in those trees. I much prefer how it turned out. I'm really happy with this build. I was happy with the Helms Deep, but I'm especially happy with this build. It just took so long as we move on to a view from Saruman's balcony. balcony now. And just from this, we then transform into a bird's eye view of the whole build again. Just really happy with how it turned out. I can't think of anything I would have done differently, maybe a few more amendments here and there. But with the Isengard tower itself, I really like the different bricks we used because it really allowed it to sort of have that character. Just as we wrap things up here though, I just want to say thank you so much if you have watched it to the end. It really does mean a lot to me, and I hope you enjoyed the build. If you want to see any future projects as well, let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.